calm, focus, happiness.
Welcome to Mindfulness Mode. Hey, today, Mindful Tribe, I have a clinical psychologist with me. She's an author, she's a TEDx speaker, and she's a mom of two boys. And man, does she have a lot of professional expertise. And I can tell you that because I've just finished reading her book, which I'm going to share with you more information about in a few minutes. And I'm really excited to tell you that I'm here today with Melissa Reilly. Melissa, are you in mindfulness mode?
I am in mindfulness mode, Bruce. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome. So, Melissa, what does mindfulness mean to you?
Well, mindfulness for me means being in the moment and aware of what you're experiencing, both sensory-wise from the information coming outside of the body, as well as the information inside the body. And that includes awareness of what's going on in our mind as well. So it isn't being in the thoughts, but being aware of the thoughts.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And Melissa, you have written a couple of books, and the one that I just finished reading is Thriving as a Mom Without a Mom. And can you tell me what took you to the point where you made the decision that you needed to write this book and make it available for other women who didn't have moms?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. So it was a bit of a journey for me getting to that point. So I was an older mom when I gave birth to my second son. My first son entered my life at the age of 3 when I married his father. And I had not had any biological children at that point. I had a difficult time carrying children. And so my second son was born just a few days shy of my 38th birthday. I didn't realize during my pregnancy and my previous losses prior to his pregnancy, how difficult it was to go through this process without having my own mother to provide support and assistance. So when I gave birth to my son, my mother had been deceased for 15 years at that point. So I had gone through many years of grieving. I had experienced the adult milestones of marriage and career and things like that without her in my life. And so when I delivered my son, I expected nothing but joy and excitement and the normal fears that all new moms go through. But I was surprised by the impact of the grieving process that overwhelmed me the day of his birth. And so I felt overwhelmed and incompetent, and nothing that I thought I did to prepare myself for motherhood seemed to be enough. I mean, after all, I was a mature woman, confident in who I was. I had been a psychologist for many years. My goodness, I had even taught parenting and treated hundreds of moms with their new mom anxiety, and yet none of that mattered. So I was just left feeling like there was something wrong with me, like I was just a bad mom, that I wasn't built for this. So I continued to see moms in my clinical practice after my son was born. And I started to notice over the years some patterns and some similarities amongst myself and other moms who didn't have the support and guidance of a loving mom in their life, whether that be because she had passed away or because there was some toxicity in the relationship. And I became curious. And being the psych nerd that I am, I did some research and I didn't find a whole lot. So fast forward a few more years, and I started to recognize that I was developing this framework that not only identified what the common experiences and challenges were, but what to do about those so that other women didn't feel as isolated, incompetent, and badly about themselves. Because we all know being a mom is hard. But the reality is being a mom without the support of a loving mom is even harder. And we feel differently because we are different. We don't have the support and guidance. We don't have that go-to person. We can't tap into her wisdom. And we are left with feelings of grief that can pop up at unexpected times.
Yeah.
And so
that's true.
Right. And so I felt once I recognized this process and started developing, a path forward and talking with more people, and then, starting to coach women specifically on being a mom without a mom, I realized that I wanted the millions of moms that are out there that don't recognize that this is something that's impacting them to learn about it. And so
I loved how your book gave specific solutions. I think that was really the thing that impacted me the most. And I loved how you explained, hey, I've got these different people in my life and you can too. And each person has a different role. Can you share some of that with our listeners, Melissa?
Absolutely. So we are not biologically designed to raise our families by ourselves, regardless of how society sets us up to do so. We just aren't. And for most of human history, families were raised within communities. And women had, their mothers, their aunts, their grandmothers, their sisters, their cousins, and a whole tribe of people to be with them. It's now in our current culture where that has in many ways disappeared. And so particularly moms without a mom need to actively seek out the roles that a mom will typically play. And so they include having people that I like to call wise women. So these are the people that know things. So they answer questions and they just have this plethora of wisdom and that you can call on, and they're generous in sharing their knowledge. The second I like to call the emotional supporter. And so these are the individuals that are really good at listening. And so they don't give advice. They don't try and cheer us up. They just let us be where we are. The third I like to call the go-getter. And so these are the people that have tons of energy. They're great at getting things done. They are the people that can get the groceries shopped and house cleaned, laundry, and the kids off to school all before 8 o'clock. I am not one of those people, by the way, but they just are built to be very task oriented. And then the fourth person or category of people I like to call the late night talker. And these are people that just have a different schedule and are available during those off times, which is important, particularly if you have an infant in your house. So none of us typically fit all of those roles unless it's a mother-daughter relationship that's healthy and close, which many of us don't have. But we just naturally don't fit all of those categories. So for example, I'm, no surprise, a good emotional supporter. I'm great at listening. I'm great at being able to just kind of be there where you are. But like I already said, I'm not a go-getter. I'm not the person that you will call if you need help getting your house put back together after your kids have been sick, right?
Yes.
I wish I was, right? I wish I was that person that my friends could call up and say, hey, I need help with this thing, but that's just not me. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I'm good at other things. And so if we know people that fit into these different categories, when we're looking for support or assistance in something, we can choose the people that are best able to help us with those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
that
makes so much sense. It really does, Melissa. Hey,
exactly.
Mindful Tribe, I just wanted to remind you, I'm talking with Melissa Reilly, and we're talking about her book, Thriving as a Mom Without a Mom. And I just want to ask you, Melissa, a lot of times when people write books, there's a revelation that they have as part of the writing process and as part of really digging into this subject. Was there a revelation that you had when you wrote the book?
I think one of the revelations that I had was that grief has been part of my life since I was a child, and I talk about the early life losses I experienced. And I have become very comfortable with grief. And I know that sounds really strange, but it's almost been like an extra character in my life. And for most of my life, I feared it.
Mm-hmm. I don't
Because I
think
didn't
it does sound
understand it.
strange. I think it sounds really mature, actually,
Mm-hmm.
because grief is a part of almost all of our lives. And a lot of times we do try to push it away. We do try to pretend that it doesn't exist. So what's the first step in embracing grief if that's part of your life right now?
Well, first, recognizing that grief is simply an experience and an emotion, that there isn't anything dangerous or harmful about it. So we don't need to fear it nor avoid it. It can be intense and it can hurt, right? But it doesn't wound us. And so recognizing grief for what it is becomes really important. And then expressing it is also important. Now, when I say expressing grief, that doesn't mean that we're necessarily talking about the losses we've experienced, but we express grief through journaling, through artwork, through song, dance, movement. There are lots of ways that we can express the longing that we have for what we don't have in our life, whether that be a person, whether that be a situation, whether that be a future we had hoped for, right? So imagining a relationship that just will never be there.
Yeah.
And being able to share that in a way that takes the experience that's inside of our body and puts it out into the universe so that we then can do something with that.
Right. What's your personal favorite way to express?
I love, honestly, to write letters. And
Okay.
so I write letters to the people I've lost, including my mom and sisters and other loved ones. And I keep it as a running dialogue. And if I'm not writing letters, I'm having the conversations in my head. So it keeps them as part of my life, even though they aren't here with me present in this space and time. And so it's an active relationship.
Right. What was the single most challenging thing about putting this book together?
Finding my author's voice, I
Mm-hmm.
think, because these stories are my stories. And I'm also a clinical psychologist who writes professionally. But this book wasn't being written for academics,
Right. Sure.
and it wasn't a scholarly book. And so I was constantly going back and forth with being personal and myself versus having this critique of, wait a minute, you're not citing enough things, you don't have the
Right.
the evidence to back it up. And so it was this constant dance. And it's my first book, and I plan on doing more, but it's just kind of getting comfortable with the subject matter and being personal. And that was another thing that was difficult, is as a clinical psychologist, emotional and personal boundaries are really important to the work that I do. And so people don't know those things about me. So
Right.
putting that out there felt really vulnerable. And it was something that I needed to really work through. Okay, what is important for me to share? Why am I sharing this? And I came to the conclusion that sharing that information was really important, because one of the things I struggled with was feeling so alone and therefore feeling badly about myself. And I don't want that for others. I don't
No.
want others to feel like there's something wrong with them. And so sharing my struggles, my vulnerabilities, as well as my successes, I think outweighed the risks of, kind of opening up my personal boundaries.
Well, Melissa, you've recently been working on a new book, Affirmations for Moms. I was wondering if you could share with us about what is an affirmation and how you feel it's valuable as a mom.
Yes, absolutely. So I'll admit, I was in college in the early 90s, and Saturday Night Live was something that, many of us watched. And there was this skit that was very popular. Smoody, I forget his name, but it was the guy that did these positive affirmations, and he would stand in front of the mirror and say, "I'm good enough. Gosh darn it, people like me," that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it was like a joke, right?
Yes.
And so I had this conception of, oh my goodness, this is just silly, ridiculous stuff, right?
Yeah.
But, then, going through, my training and doctoral program and everything, I've learned the power of the mind, and I've learned the meaning that we make impacts not only our experience of the world, but our physical bodies as well. And so affirmations are simply an example of words that we use about ourselves to ourselves that can impact how we feel about ourselves, but also impact the way our body responds and acts. And they are really powerful. They're not the end all be all, but they can be a very simple, easy practice that we incorporate into our daily wellness routines. And so they're like little pep talks. They're little positive speeches. And it can be simple, simple as, you know what? I'm doing the best that I can today as a mom, and I feel really good about that. So there's simple little messages. And so this new book that I'm developing is geared to those affirmations specifically for moms, and moms of all stages, right? I've got ones for new moms, moms of infants, moms of school-age children, the moms who have adult children, because we don't stop being a mom once our children become adults, right?
So
but it's
true.
Different, right? And then I've got affirmations for the angry mom, for the sad mom, for the grieving mom, for the mom without a mom, right? So things that you can kind of pull in, I'm really struggling. Let me look, specifically, and then what lands with you. And just, again, I'm all about incorporating things in little ways, especially moms, the idea of having to add another thing to our plate is just overwhelming. So if we can do something that, takes 5 seconds, or we can incorporate something into something else we're already doing, I'm all about that.
Yeah, I agree. I agree for sure. Melissa, I want to ask you a question about bullying. I've worked in that field for quite some time. Do you have a story about bullying where mindfulness would have made a difference?
Absolutely. I was kind of toying back and forth with examples of bullying. And I think I've got 2 real quick. One was my little sister when we were in high school. So she was 2 years younger than me, and she had some learning disabilities, attention deficit. And back in the early 80s, that kind of stuff wasn't really talked much about. So she was just a, weird kid. Anyway, I was just always good at emotionally regulating her. Well, one day, this girl was picking on her and threatening to beat her up, physical violence. And so my sister came to me and, was sharing this with me. Now, my sister and I are petite, we're small, short. This girl was a big girl. So even though I was only a year older than her, she absolutely could have hurt me violently. Mm-hmm. There was no way I could have defended physically. But I had the wherewithal to know I needed to protect my sister at all costs. So I needed to stay calm. I needed to be very assertive and direct and, convince this girl that if she harmed my sister, she would have bad things happen. But I had to do that in a way that didn't provoke her violence towards me, because I knew I had nothing to back it up. And so it's still so present in my mind because it was really one of the first times I remember consciously being mindful of my own state and the state of people around me. And it de-escalated the situation. And she and my sister became really good friends after that.
Wow,
So
what a great story.
it was. And I wasn't aware of doing that or needing to do that. I just somehow intuitively did that.
Right.
And then the other example, I think there's a lot of mom bullying, unintentionally. And for all the moms out there, you know what I'm talking about, the co-sleep versus sleeping separately, the breastfeeding versus the formula feeding, all of these big, cry it out. There's all these different viewpoints that we feel passionately about. And that can unintentionally lead to bullying behavior, especially in some of the online spaces. And so for me, I think mindfulness and awareness of why you're becoming so triggered and needing to become negative in your commenting can be really helpful in stopping some of that bullying behavior.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, thanks for sharing those two stories, Melissa. As we move forward, I want to ask you 5 quick answer questions, Melissa.
Yes.
So just 30-second answers are perfect. The first one is this: who is one person who has been a powerful mindfulness influence in your life?
Viktor Frankl, the author of A Man's Search for Meaning, and Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist master.
Right. Okay. We'll put those in our show notes at mindfulnessmode.com. My second question is about emotions. How has mindfulness helped you deal with your emotions differently, Melissa?
It's helped me recognize that my emotions feel differently when they're regulated versus not regulated. So the intensity of emotions isn't what's a problem. It's my body's ability to process that emotion so that I'm still functioning in a way that is consistent with my values and priorities.
Well, let's talk about breathing. Let's just talk about how mindfulness has maybe allowed you to think of breathing differently, or maybe even some breathing techniques.
Well, breathing is at the heart of our being. It is the first thing we do and one of the last things we do in life. And so it influences everything, both physiologically as well as emotionally. So when we become aware of our breath and intentionally slow it or change it in certain ways, then we experience a different awareness of ourselves. So I am very mindful of the way I breathe. And one of the mistakes I see very often when people are anxious is they think if they take a big, deep breath, it'll help calm them. And that's actually not true. Taking a slow out breath is much more calming.
Okay. Well, your book, Thriving as a Mom Without a Mom, is a book that I recommend. Are there any other books that you would recommend to our listeners?
Absolutely. Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And then Thich Nhat Hanh's, I loved his Peace in Every Step. I found that to be super helpful. And for the other more psych nerds out there, Dan Siegel writes a lot on interpersonal neurobiology and his mindfulness things. And so he has a great one out right now called Aware. And that's a wonderful book as well.
Okay. And any apps that can help with mindfulness?
I like Headspace. I think it's an awesome app. It's got great automations and, the voice in your head. I just think it's awesome.
Great. Well, before we wrap up the interview, do you have any final words of advice for our listeners, Melissa?
Absolutely. For any of you out there that are parenting without the support and guidance of loving people in your life, I want you to know that it's okay that you feel differently because you are different. But there are lots of things that you can do. And if you need support, reach out to other friends, reach out to professionals, therapists, coaches, because there is assistance for you. You don't need to do this alone.
Right. And your website is momswithoutamom.com.
Yes.
And is there a way that our listeners could reach out to you?
Absolutely. I offer a free coaching call to anybody. So I truly value connecting and assisting with people. So that's available on my website. I also have an audio membership. It's called Echoes of Maternal Wisdom. And it is this is where I record positive affirmations, guided imagery, and meditation designed specifically for moms. And you get a 15-minute recording every week.
Wow, that sounds really interesting. And we can find that on your website?
Yes, absolutely. Yep, it's there.
Great. Thanks, Melissa.
You're welcome. I'm also on Instagram at momswithoutamom.com. I'm on TikTok, momswithoutamom.com. Facebook, I have a Facebook group, Thriving as a Mom Without a Mom. So I invite all your listeners to reach out, connect. I want to hear from you. I want to support you in any way that you can. And there's lots of resources on my website, including blogs and things like that, that give, tips and support and information. So I would encourage them to check that out.
Fantastic. Melissa, thank you so much for putting all of this out into the world and helping so many moms with their issues. And thank you so much for being on Mindfulness Mode.
You are very welcome, Bruce. And thank you for all that you're doing. I think as the world becomes more mindful, everything is going to get better.
I agree with you. Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.